Okay, so we're going to work some problems to go with chapter 11 and 13. And the first two will be from chapter 11 about at risk and passive. And then the second two will be from chapter 13 about credits. So starting with problem 1152. This one is testing your understanding or trying to solidify, I guess, your understanding of the at-risk rules and the passive loss rules. So we got this problem. 5 years ago, Gerald invested 150,000 in a passive activity, his sole investment venture. On January 1 of 2023, his amount at risk in the activity was $30,000. His share of the income and losses were as follows. So they show him with a big loss in 2023 of 40,000, and then another loss in 2024 of 30,000, but then finally a profit in 2025 of 50,000. Gerald holds no suspended at-risk or passive activity losses at the beginning of 2023. So they're asking us a few things. First, they want to know if losses were limited only by the at-risk rules, how much could Gerald deduct for 2023? So reminding you, the problem said he had an at-risk amount of $30,000 at the beginning. So that's the limitation. That's how much he can deduct as a loss. He cannot exceed his amount at risk. And so, of the 2023 loss, the only part he's going to be able to take is $30,000, and the rest will be suspended. So, the 30,000 he had in basis or at-risk amount, which are a lot of times the same, just sometimes not because of liabilities that the individual might assume. But in any case, in these problems that we're dealing with, the at-risk and basis are aligned. So we have 30,000 at risk at the beginning of the year. We took a loss to wipe all of that at risk amount. And so no more at risk at the end of 2023. And so there won't be any more amounts at risk until the income shows up in 2025. And that will increase the at-risk amount back up to 50,000 so that we can deduct the suspended losses that we were not able to take in the previous years. So then at the end, we wind up with a $10,000 at-risk amount. Just they're going to ask us this in the questions as we go along. But you know how I like to solve it as when we first look at it. But in any case, we've got for the question they ask us, if they were limited only by at-risk, how much could he deduct in 2023 and 2024? So the answer would be he can deduct $30,000 in 2023 and he can deduct zero in 2024. So that is very obvious and clear that when at-risk rules come into play, you could not take more than you have at risk. And then once you pass that milestone to say, yes, I can deduct $30,000 under at-risk rules, you still have to jump through the hoop to see if you're allowed to deduct based on passive activity loss rules. And so in this case, if we only had to deal with that risk, we could take a loss of 30,000 in 2023, but then nothing in 2024. So that was the first question they asked us. Then going down to the second question, they said, refer to the information in Part A above, which we just did. If the losses were limited by at-risk and passive activity loss, how much would he be able to deduct? And so looking at it from the passive side, the problem told us at the beginning that this is his only investment, his only passive activity. So if he has only losses, there will be no passive loss to report, no deductibility of passive losses unless it can offset passive income. So looking at it from the passive loss perspective, we see that he has a passive loss in 2023 of 40,000, another one in 2024. There's no passive income to offset it with. So for passive loss purposes, it is suspended entirely. So the 70,000 going forward into 2025 is suspended losses. Then 2025 kind of redeems the situation and allows us to deduct all of those suspended losses. So then when we're done deducting the losses, offsetting that $50,000 of income by deducting the suspended losses, then we are still left with $20,000 worth of suspended losses at the end of 2025. So to answer their question, their second question, the B part said, if the losses were limited by at-risk and passive activity loss, how much could he deduct in those 2 years, 2023 and 2024? The answer is 0 in both cases. And then they ask us for the second part of the B, of the allowable at-risk. Well, here, I think I have this written here. 0, no passive loss means no passive income means no passive loss. And then the secondary part of the B, of the allowable at-risk loss of 2023, that 30,000 that we thought we were going to get to deduct when it was just about at-risk rules. Gerald may deduct how much in 2023 due to the passive loss rules and of the allowable at-risk loss of 2024, he may deduct. So it's 0 because passive trumps the whole thing. If the at-risk rules are what we do first, and if we see there is an ability to deduct up to that amount, that's a limitation. But then we can't even deduct that amount if the passive loss rules hits and causes us not to be able to offset. So even though the at-risk rules would have allowed that $30,000 loss, passive loss rules stopped all the losses because there was no passive income. Okay, so that's A and B. Now there you got a third question. What is the amount of Gerald's suspended losses at the end of 2025? And so we just looked at that at the end of for suspended losses for at risk. There is no more loss suspended because as of 2025, the at risk amounts were not there were not limiting losses at all. And then at the end of 2025, suspended losses for passive activity, we kind of preempted their question with that. We calculated that 20,000 that would still be a suspended passive loss because the passive rules were limiting the losses until such time as there's enough passive income to offset them. So we had that $70,000 suspended loss. We showed a $50,000 passive income in that 2025 year. So we're still left with that 20,000 that's suspended. So that's the answer to the passive activity loss, 20,000. And then what is his taxable income for 2025? He had no taxable income because the suspended loss wiped out the passive income of 50,000. So it's $50,000 passive income minus $50,000 was a suspended loss for a 0 net. So that takes care of problem 1152. Okay, let's go to problem 1130, which is somewhat similar, same rules applying. Rhonda has an adjusted basis and an at-risk amount of $7,500 in the passive activity at the beginning of the year. She also has a suspended passive activity loss of $1,500 carried over from a prior year. During the current year, she had a loss of $12,000 over the she had a loss of $12,000 from the passive activity. Rhonda has no passive activity income from other sources this year. So again, we're not going to get a passive loss if we don't have any passive income. Determine the following items relating to her passive activity at the end of the year. What is her adjusted basis in the activity? Okay, let's just take a look at it. She has no basis in the activity because again, a passive activity, at-risk limitation rules about the at-risk basis is the same most of the time as just the tax basis. And so the basis and the at-risk amount is $7,500 at the beginning of the year. And then she was allowed a $7,500 loss because that's the limitation. That was the most she could take. So for at-risk purpose, she had 0 basis at the end of the year. Then for her loss suspended under the at-risk rules, she took the 7,500. She could take the 7,500. There was no indication that she had a carryover at-risk loss, but she had a $12,000 loss this year, which she was able to use 7,500 of it because she had at-risk basis. So she had left 4,500 suspended based on at-risk rules alone. So we know that she's not going to be able to take her $7,500 loss, even though it qualified for at-risk rules, because once we take the next step and try to jump through the next hoop for passive, it's going to get kicked out. But for the purposes of at-risk rules, the only part that was suspended is $4,500. So that's what they wanted right there. All right, then how much was suspended for passive activity losses? So what they're asking here, they're saying how much of the loss is suspended. All of it's suspended, the 12,000 plus the 1,500 from the previous year. But they're asking you how much was just because of passive rules that it got suspended. So it gets a little sticky how they ask the question. But in this case, they wanted to know how much. They asked us in the B part, how much got suspended because of at risk. And that was that $4,500. Then they want to know how much gets suspended now because of passive rules. And so that one, we just look at the total loss that came in from the previous year that was suspended. 1,500 had been disallowed before. And then the $12,000 loss this year had no passive income to offset it. So it's also disallowed for passive purposes. So 13,500 total is disallowed or suspended. And 4,500 of it can be explained because it was already limited by at-risk rules. So only the $9,000 that's left is suspended solely because of passive rules. Okay, so that's the two problems that we're covering for that. It likes to stay with me. Sorry about that. So let's go to the credits in Chapter 13. This is problem 1324. In 2024, Miranda records net earnings from self-employment of $200,000. She has no other income. They want to determine the amount of Miranda's self-employment tax and her AGI income tax deduction. So this is the credits chapter, but it also has self-employment tax. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. But in any case, we're just coming up with her self-employment tax, and there's that Social Security base. I believe it's 168.6 for the 2024 year. And so what we had to look at is how much is her income. She's over the Social Security max or the Social Security base. So we can't, we could, if she was under the Social Security max or the FICA max, we could calculate just a straight 15.3% tax to calculate her Social Security tax or her self-employment tax, sorry. But this case, she's over the FICA max. So we have to do a little gyration to see how much it is she's going to owe. So we take this $200,000 and we say, I'm sorry. Sorry, I got the wrong number. This is a different problem than the one I worked in the problem. Let me stop it right there.